Hello everyone, and welcome back to Ethlor Plays Go. Today we have another episode of Baduk Mindset, and today we're going to be talking a bit about losing streaks. So I was at a tournament this weekend, and we played 6 games over the course of 3 days. This was not the London Open, so not the London Open, but the not the London Open. And out of 6 games, I ended up losing 5 of them. And I lost a couple of games leading up to the tournament as well. So I'm in the middle of a little bit of a losing streak right now. And I think that means that it's a good time to make this video because I think that if you're in the middle of a losing streak, then that can help to give good advice, because I think that sometimes if you're not in a losing streak, that it can make it difficult to empathize with the position or give advice that's fitting. So I hope that this is a good time to make this video, and yeah, let's just dive into it. So I think that there are different types of losing streaks, and I think that there's one of them that's particularly biting. It's difficult to deal with, and other ones are perhaps more expected and not so difficult. So one of them is if you're winning a lot of your games, you're improving, then eventually you'll start playing players who are a lot better than you, and that will usually trigger a losing streak. And so what this means is that you're a little bit overranked, and of course, naturally, things will stop working, and you'll just start losing a lot of games as a result. This is kind of natural, and while it can be a little bit frustrating, and it can definitely perhaps get a bit out of hand, I don't think it's like the worst kind of losing streak. Then there's a number of losses that you can take, so random chance. So yeah, here's my cursor, you can see. So like random chance, where you lose a couple of games, but I don't think it's not attached to losing, not attached to playing worse in a systemic way, and so it doesn't really it's still losing a number of games, but it's not something that's going to get wildly out of hand. And the final thing, the thing that I outlined here, is playing worse, where you're playing a lot worse than you normally do, and you start losing to players who have perhaps a more unstructured approach, or who aren't as high, aren't of the same rank as you are. Um, this is perhaps the part that's the most difficult thing, where you lose a couple of games to start with, and then as you start facing the players who you should have a better or an easier time against, you start losing to them as well, because they're also the strongest kind of player who will play a more unstructured or play more overplays, and although you are likely to spot them, they're also the strongest kind of player that you would still lose to. And so this is where the losing streak kind of begins. So now that we've kind of like outlined what losing streaks are and what they are not, so not necessarily losing a lot to players who you'd expect to have a difficult time against anyway, and not just like a random string, but just really playing worse in a way that it's difficult to help. That's kind of what the losing streak really is. And so what are some causes? So I find that these aren't necessarily all of the causes. It's difficult to know what's causing your losing streak, but I think that these ones are perhaps some of the more obvious ones that you can easily remedy. So not playing enough, and so you usually have like a regimented approach to saying you play like 1 or 2 games a day, something to that extent. And if you fall off of that a little bit, you can become worse, and that can trigger a losing streak. It sounds obvious, but these have been triggers to some of my losing streaks in the past. And although it seems quite obvious, that can already start things off on a bad foot and put you in a bad position. Other things can be playing too much. So say you're playing like, for me, if I play more than 3 games a day, then my play will start to get a lot worse because I stop thinking so deeply about my moves. And this causes me to not be so sharp, perhaps I'm a little bit tired, and that causes me to play worse as well. Other things can be training methods. So if you do too much memorization, or if you play too many handicap games or too many blitz games, these things can be good if you have them at the right time for the right purpose to the right extent. But if you get all of this wrong, so you do it for the wrong reasons, or you do it too much, or all these things can throw your game off. And so, and then all of these can put you in a bad mindset. So you start playing in a more jealous way, you become more anxious or pessimistic. All of this can really impact your play and degrade the quality. And that's what's causing the losing against people who are usually at the who you'd consider to be at the same rank as you. These aren't the only causes. I think that there can be reasons for being on a losing streak that aren't these reasons. It can be difficult to nail it down, but I think these kind of cover the really obvious things that can maybe put your mind at ease. And if not, that's okay. I think that there's still ways to deal with it, but this is just some ways to help us start thinking about the problem. So then, yeah, so here I say that the general overview here is that your training is a little bit not quite right. So you're not being as consistent, or maybe you're focusing on the wrong things, or you learned too much, and these things can kind of trigger you playing not so well. But that doesn't have to be the only thing. And so, as I mentioned, if you're not training in a regular way, what does training in a regular way look like? It's playing, a couple of live games, so not blitz and not correspondence games, but playing a couple of normal games a day. Um, Perhaps not a day, maybe once every couple of days, that kind of thing. Reviewing your games is quite important. Perhaps having a couple of rest days where you're not playing at all, and then having like regular life and death sessions. So I think this is perhaps the very most basic training regimen you can have. And your training regimen might have adaptations on it based on what you enjoy or what you want to focus on. But this should kind of be your very, very standard training protocol. And so if you're deviating a lot from this, then uh, playing in this way will help you maintain a certain level. And if you're deviating too much from this, then you'll start falling down a little bit. Yeah, so the issue then is what happens then after you start losing your games because perhaps for some whatever reason you're not at your peak condition. Then a couple of bad games that you play can start you to have a lot of these various negative feelings. You have feelings of frustration, impatience, catastrophizing, and spiraling. And I want to talk about each of these things individually. So the first thing that you might start dealing with is frustration. So as you try and play things, they kind of stop working because you're somehow not at the peak of the game, so you're not reading quite correctly, you're not judging the board right, and so feelings of these negative feelings of frustration can start to set in. This can start messing with your game. Other things might be impatience. So you start thinking, oh, I really want this to work. It's not just the frustration, but also just not quite reading a move out or getting a little bit jealous. These kinds of negative feelings can start to creep in. Other things can be catastrophizing. And this is really, I think, for me, this was one of my biggest problems where I start saying, oh, I can't even get this right. What am I good for? Will I ever improve again? And these kinds of your losses start to balloon out to become bigger and bigger things. So you start questioning your worth as a Go player, and that this really leads you to dark places. And so my advice as well is that if you're in this position where you're thinking a lot about these bigger picture things, then now is not the time. Now is not the time to be asking, will I ever improve again? Or uh, you know, does this say something about me? You should leave all of these questions aside because they're just not useful and you're not in the right headspace to evaluate these kinds of things. Normally, the best time to think about your progression is once every couple of months when you can step back and have a longer term perspective of your play. So, this is so if you're thinking about game to game losses, and that's just not the right time to be thinking about these kinds of things. And then finally, the spiraling that you have all these feelings, you have the impatience, the frustration, the question, the catastrophizing, and all of this causes you to lose more games because you're now it's not just because you're playing just a little bit worse. You have these negative feelings that causes you to play even worse, and then as the losses start to stack, then you start playing. You play faster, you play more games, and you start to fixate, and that's when things really start to fall apart. You can start losing like whole ranks because of this. And this is where things completely go out of control. So the point is that you want to prevent things from getting to this point where you start to spiral. You might feel these feelings of frustration or impatience, and these are emotions that are natural and that you can learn to deal with. And then when it comes to catastrophizing, you just learn to not ask these deeper questions and kind of know for a fact, okay, it doesn't matter, there are these losses, but and they will pass. And they'll it's difficult to have faith in this, but you basically have to accept that as truth. Otherwise, you'll have nothing, and then you'll start to spiral, and then people start taking breaks, and breaks aren't necessarily bad, but breaks don't improve your play. Breaks will continue to they'll kind of like undo some of the bad habits a little bit as you forget things about the game, but you've also forgotten things, and so you won't play as well. And so people take breaks thinking that they'll be better when they come back, and that can sometimes happen, but not really. So, and then these breaks become longer and longer, and then eventually people just quit. So you can see how like we have these losing streaks, and depending on how bad things get, it can cause people to even end up quitting the game. So this is really a problem that we want to deal with. So, what are some solutions? So, first of all, don't hyperfixate on a specific server. So, I went on a losing streak that was quite bad in 2022, and it was on OGS, and I started losing a number of games. And then what happened was that I just kept playing on the server, and and because I was playing on the server, I was hyperfixating on my rank, and so I had the impatience, frustration, the catastrophization, everything, and that caused me to lose many games. And then I ended up taking a break because it ended up being too much. This losing streak was caused by things opening up after the pandemic, and I wasn't playing so much because I was out socializing, these kinds of things, and that's what caused this losing streak. And then I got really hyperfixated on this single server. The one thing you can do is go on many servers, and what this does is it means that you're less likely to hyperfixate your rank on any single one. And if you do, then it's also diluted by the effect of playing on other servers. You'll have a distribution of ranks, and so it means that there'll be some servers where you're a little bit overranked, and some of them where things are a bit easy, and that things can move over time. And this just creates a little bit of a buffer effect, where if you start losing a lot on a single server, then you still have other servers where you'll probably retain your rank. And so this can help to block some of the really negative emotions. Another thing, as I mentioned, is to have a regular frequency of play. So don't start accelerating the number of games that you play. Don't start playing like 3 or 5 games a day. Keep things at a regular pace, and don't play more just because you're losing. For the games that you do lose, you should accept that you're losing them and just review your mistakes. That's really all that you can do, is just look at where things went wrong and do things better for next time. Talk to stronger players if you can. Uh, you can talk to an AI or seek the feedback from an AI. The point is just to learn where you're going wrong and to learn from them. It's really all you can do. Aside from playing, maybe you might play at a not at the usual pace, but perhaps a little bit slower, and then focus on other things that you do enjoy. So, for instance, you might watch lectures, perhaps not too many, but something, pro games, life and death problems, watching YouTube videos. These kinds of things can help you to put you back into the right mindset, especially watching like pro games or watching games of people who are stronger than you. That can help to put you back on a certain path where before you're kind of like going a little bit off course. And the main thing is just not to really start questioning everything and start thinking, oh, will I never improve again? Or does this mean that I wasn't at this rank and I'll never reach there? And these questions are not helpful right now. Just leave them aside. Um, so there is some good and bad news just to kind of wrap up. Unfortunately, you cannot force a losing streak to end. So unfortunately, although I wish that this is something I could do right now, it's not something that can really be done. Furthermore, there will be some opponents eventually that you cannot lose to because they're ranked very far beneath you. If you are very, very triggered, and you'll start losing to them as well, and you'll plunge even further, but eventually this plunging will stop. And then eventually things will turn around and you'll start winning a lot of games because you're underranked, and so naturally you'll start winning more. And so the best thing you can do is just realize that this is going to happen eventually, and that your main task is just to keep your composure and to keep things on a certain very narrow path. And, well, not necessarily narrow, but keep things on a very disciplined path. Don't get too attached to the emotions, and to just keep playing and to just keep trying to see where your mistakes are and to put yourself back on the right track. As I mentioned, the most likely reason for a losing streak is that there's some issue with your training. That doesn't necessarily have to be the case, but it can also mean that you've been really, really successful and you've overranked, and so there are other losing streaks that can happen as well, as we discussed at the start. And so that's basically everything. One thing I want to end on a kind of motivational note, because as we saw, with the pictures and the previous slides, losing streaks can really put you into a really bad place as a Go player. And one thing I want to say is that it's easy to play Go when you're winning all the time, or winning half of your games. But when you're losing a lot, this is when you really start to separate yourself from other players. So how you deal with that, like emotionally, is important, but also getting through these losing streaks will make you a better player. Because when you're losing, that's when you learn the most. And so, for instance, like during this tournament, I could have allowed the frustration to get to me. I could have started resigning games more, which is something that happens. You're a little bit pessimistic. You start resigning. You should play your games to the end. And when you lose, you should do it with grace. You should say, I aim to, maybe I win the next game and that's enough for me. Or, I lost these games. I want to learn and be better. And this kinds of like inner strength and inner fire, this is even in the times when things are really, really dark, that is the most important thing. Where if you allow it to crush you, then it can really like eradicate your existence as a Go player. And this is something we all want to prevent because we want to make sure that we have as many players as possible because the game, it'd be great for it to grow. But yeah, that's basically everything that I wanted to go through. Hopefully, your losing streak doesn't last so long. Hopefully, it ends soon. And yeah, thanks for joining. And if you enjoy these videos, then I hope you like, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you in the next one.